I don't know how we go through life without constantly having some form of transformation happening. It might not be huge stuff, but there are constantly things that we're adapting to that cause us to grow. Um, I I can't think of a single example of someone who isn't at any moment going through something that is changing them.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I get that. For me, that maybe it's just semantics, but for me, transformation
Yeah.
seems to imply a dramatic change. Whereas I think when we lead, we do change, or we should change because it's like a forward momentum. But I'm not
Yeah.
sure whether dramatic change is needed for all people who want to be successful in leadership. I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is Aneace Haddad. How are you doing?
Good. How are you, Judith?
I'm doing well, thank you. I understand that you've come back from a trip.
Yes, I took a road trip to Italy with my family, back to places somewhere I had worked when I was in my 20s, and visited many parts, many areas that I had visited when I used to live in France. So it was kind of a nostalgic road trip with my little Singapore-based Australian family. And now just got back yesterday morning to Singapore and readjusting to the tropical climate here.
Cool. So tell us a little bit more about you.
So my story, originally from the U.S., but I've lived what 40 years outside the U.S. More than that, the last 40 years outside the U.S. I was in France for around 20 years. I've been in Singapore now 17, almost 18 years. I was in Italy for a while before France. Originally, I was a programmer, a techie, and then I turned into an entrepreneur in my late 20s. I built a payment software company in France, grew it to 30 countries, sold it in 2007 when I was 47, and had a midlife crisis that year and moved to Singapore, sold my company, moved to Singapore, had a divorce, and discovered that I liked people more than computers, which set me in a completely different career late in life. And now I'm an executive coach and work with C-suites, probably a lot like your work.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah. So, you know what? I'm really intrigued with our subject today, which is whether it's possible to find true success in leadership without personal transformation. So I'm dead keen to have your view on that.
So I have my view is pretty clear on this one, pretty simple. I think it might have been possible in the past, um, when change wasn't happening so quickly. Now, pretty much everyone working in a corporate role in anywhere is going through a lot of transitions and changes in the organization. There's transformation of the organizations, changes in strategies, changes in hierarchy, and all that. And I don't think it's possible to lead transformation if we are not ourselves in transformation. I don't think it's possible to coach transformation if we are not in transformation. I think otherwise, if we pretend that we're not in transformation, we're actually trying to teach people how to change and how to transform. And it's not the same thing as leading it. Does that make sense?
Hmm. It does.
So it's what a lot of times I think when transformation doesn't happen in a large organization is because when people at the top feel like everyone else has to change around them and they're not really focusing on themselves.
Hmm. Yes. So it's interesting, the subject, because a lot of people, when they think about leadership, they think about things that you do to others to get what you want. And I'm always very much about leadership being personal. The actual leader has an impact all
Yeah.
of their own. So,
Yeah.
what type of personal transformation do you mean?
Oh, wow. Actually, I don't think I don't think we can live if we're not in some form of transformation at every moment. I think we're constantly in transition. Um, I around a year, so in order to focus these thoughts, around a year ago, I made a conscious decision to no longer coach individuals and teams under 40. And the reason that I did that was that I was starting to notice a qualitative difference in leadership transformation and growth with leaders in their midlife versus a little bit younger. So I wrote a book about it that just came out last week, Soaring Beyond Midlife, and I see three what I call winds of change that force transformation and transitions on all of us going through midlife, and has a pretty big impact on our leadership style. So the first wind of change is physiological. Our bodies are changing. We don't have as much stamina as we used to. We can't go out drinking with colleagues and buddies and stuff, and then the next day be effective at a board meeting the way we might have used to in our 30s. Health issues start to come up. And at the same time, we have especially living today at midlife, at the same time, we're starting to realize that we may be living much longer than our grandparents and great grandparents, and we might be active for another 30, 40, 45 years beyond what we had expected before. So all of that together is the physiological wind of change at midlife, where we're realizing this is all happening, and these changes are happening whether we want them or not. They're there. So they force us to adapt. The second wind of change is neurological, and these are all relatively new discoveries over the last 10, 15, 20 years. Things like the prefrontal cortex slowing down. So we forget where we put our car keys, forget our child's name, or the contents of the cell on a spreadsheet, where in the past we mastered all of that. And we tend to become resistant and resentful of that loss of brain power that we used to have, and that can make us prickly because we're not adapting to it. At the same time, the two hemispheres, our brain hemisphere and left brain hemisphere, are communicating more actively together. So that means that as we go further into midlife, we're able to connect the dots and notice patterns more easily than we would have younger. So that those two shifts in our brains match perfectly a lot of people's leadership journey, where in their 30s they're still really managing people. They haven't really moved into a higher level leadership position. And then our 40s and 50s, we need to let go of knowing everything, having all the answers, seeing our value is in the answers, and we need to find new value in being able to connect the dots and see patterns. Then there's a third transition, which most of us go through with kids, is that our kids are starting to grow up and leave home. And I'm grossly exaggerating because there are people with younger kids, there are people with no kids, but the tendency is that in our 40s and 50s, many executives have kids, and many of the executives with kids, they're growing up and leaving home. So we have a whole new area of transformation that's forced on us, if you like, where we must transition as parents from a mode that looks a lot more like a KPI kind of mode of telling kids what to do and what not to do and what'll happen if they do this, what'll happen if they do that. And we're forced to learn to move into a new space where our value is no longer about being able to give all that advice, and our value comes from truly inspiring our children, our adult children who are free to make their own decisions. So it again closely mirrors the kind of complex transformations that happen in leadership. So with all of this going on, the idea of leading without being in transformation seems like a really ludicrous wish from people that don't want to change personally. And I don't see I don't often meet people like that really don't want to change at all.
Transformation itself is quite a big and powerful word. And
yeah,
I'm not sure in your premise, actually. I think you can't lead from without change of yourself. But I think that, I don't know, I think the title kind of implies that each time there's some sort of personal transformation, and I'm not sure on that.
I don't know how we go through life without constantly having some form of transformation happening. It might not be huge stuff, but there are constantly things that we're adapting to that cause us to grow. I can't think of a single example of someone who isn't at any moment going through something that is changing them.
Yeah, I get that. It's just that for me, that maybe it's just semantics, but for me, transformation seems to imply a dramatic change. Whereas I think when we lead, we do change, or we should change, because it's like a forward momentum. But I'm not sure whether dramatic change is needed for all people who want to be successful in leadership. I mean, I can understand, I can understand it from like a deficit model, in the sense that somebody's not very good and there's some sort of catalyst, whether it's from a mentor or training or personal reflection or something, and they make a dramatic change. But I think if I'm thinking about like some of the people that you were saying, the over 40s, some of them will need a dramatic change and others might not need dramatic change.
Yeah, I don't think that it's constantly really big change and crucibles and stuff like that.
Right.
So I also don't relate to the idea of people needing dramatic change. It's kind of something that there is change to some people looking from the outside that appears dramatic, and the person experiencing it doesn't experience it as dramatic. And there are other examples where situations where from the outside it looks like a tiny change, and to the person experiencing it feels extremely dramatic. So it's really hard to make those distinctions. What I see in midlife is that there's a collection of, I see it as a perfect storm with all of these different things happening at midlife, some of them happening more dramatically than others at times. So it's a time when things are changing more than they were in our 20s and 30s.
I get you.
That's what it felt to me in that period.
I see what you say. So what you're saying is like it's a fusion of all the changes that someone goes through midlife, and whilst at the same way you need to adapt to those changes, your own style of leadership needs to adapt as well.
It's actually, I would remove the word need. For me, it's simply that by living and by adapting to life, things happen within us. There are studies that show across the board that our resilience increases over age. So the
Mm.
resilience scores at 40 are lower than the resilience scores at 50 and lower than the resilience scores at 60 over a large group of people without looking at them actually practicing anything different like everyone is dealing with that. Everyone is dealing with the change in their way and adapting. And by so doing, their leadership style adapts.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
it's more that rather than needing to. It's a natural. I see it as a natural organic process.
Gotcha. So have you gone through a transformative journey in your own leadership?
I have gone through many transform. The big one, or a big one, was in my late 40s, selling the company, thinking I was going to be a serial entrepreneur. I had always been a techie. Um, I started creating other companies after I'd sold mine, and it was the discovery there that what I was most proud of when I was building my company was my people. I was surprised to find that I was most proud when someone would go off and become a CEO, CTO, CFO of another company. I was more proud of that than the software we had created or the patents I had written and filed. Um, and that really sent me into this new journey of becoming a coach, um, which was a huge shift from my earlier roles. And within that, there are lots of smaller transformations, letting go of knowledge and expertise, um, letting go of the how to put it, the social benefit of being a tech CEO, speaking at banking conferences globally and flying business class everywhere, letting go of that and being just another coach among a lot of coaches. There's a lot of transformation that's happened.
Okay, that makes sense. So what would you share with people who are on their journey of transformation?
What I share with again people at midlife, because I'm really focused in that area now, is to become aware of all the areas that are changing around them in their lives and become aware of how these changes can manifest as a leader and lean into them. So,
Hmm.
as opposed to resisting the change, find a way to lean into it. Um, I say that, and at the same time, I go to the gym regularly and all that. So I want to keep my physiological. I'm 64 now. I want to keep my physiological state as best as I can, but at the same time, there's this leaning into that I think is very powerful. Um, I've noticed. So I mentioned three winds of change: physiological, neurological, and parental. Actually, the third one was what I first noticed around 10 years ago with C-suite leaders. Um, there is often a mirroring in our professional lives that reflects our parenting stage. So when I see too many very detailed, tedious KPIs, it feels like people still have young kids around them, and it usually turns out that way. So there's a transit. So there's a realization that, okay, my kids are growing up. My parenting style is changing. Let me lean into that. Let it change more. Let me become more empowering, more inspiring. Let me learn really what it is to empower others. And by leaning into that, let me see that impact at work. So I think the main message is becoming aware of these changes and then leaning into them as opposed to resisting them.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we reached an end, unless there is something that you thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe we didn't cover that.
No, I think that's a yeah, pretty good summary.
I think it was really good to have you on the show.
Well, it was wonderful being there. Thank you.
Thank you once again for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I am your host, Judith Germain, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox magazine. The Maverick Paradox magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.